I was 20 years old when I started babysitting for the Harper family. I was in my second year of college, and between tuition, rent, and groceries, I needed every extra dollar I could make. A neighbor told me about a couple who lived 15 minutes away and needed someone to watch their 6-year-old daughter every other Friday while they went out for dinner and a movie. It sounded like the easiest job in the world. The neighborhood was quiet. Every house looked nearly identical, with trimmed hedges, clean sidewalks, and porch lights that switched on automatically as the sun went down. Nothing about the place seemed unusual. When I arrived for my first night, Emily answered the front door before her parents could. She hugged a worn-out stuffed rabbit and smiled shyly. "Hi," her mother laughed. "She's been waiting by the window for almost 20 minutes. Inside, everything felt warm and normal. Family photos covered the walls. Toys were neatly arranged in the living room. A cartoon played softly on the television as Karen grabbed her purse. Mark walked me upstairs. He showed me Emily's bedroom. Then, before we went back downstairs, he stopped beside the window. "One thing," he said. He checked the latch himself before looking at me. "Before you put Emily to bed, make sure this window is locked." I nodded. "Okay." He didn't explain why. I assumed it was just one of those things overly cautious parents worried about. Before leaving, he repeated it. "The bedroom window. I'll lock it. Please." That was the only unusual thing either of them said. The rest of the evening couldn't have gone better. Emily colored while I made macaroni and cheese. We built a blanket fort in the living room. She showed me every stuffed animal she owned and insisted I memorize all their names. By 8:30, I brushed her teeth, tucked her into bed, and remembered Mark's strange request. I walked over to the window. It was already locked. Just to be safe, I pushed against it. It didn't move. Satisfied, I turned off the bedroom light, leaving only the little fox-shaped nightlight glowing beside her bed. An hour later, I went upstairs to check on her. She was asleep, but something immediately caught my attention. The curtains were moving. I frowned. The bedroom window was open about 3 inches. For a second, I simply stared. I knew I'd checked it. I remembered hearing the latch click. Maybe Emily had woken up and opened it. Kids did strange things. Without waking her, I quietly closed the window and locked it again. I didn't mention it to her parents. It didn't seem important. 2 weeks later, I babysat again. Everything happened exactly the same way. Dinner, games, bedtime, window locked. Around 10 o'clock, I checked on Emily. Again, the window was open, exactly 3 inches. I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob. This time I knew I hadn't imagined locking it. I even tested it twice. I looked toward Emily. She hadn't moved. She was curled beneath her blanket with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. I quietly shut the window and locked it. When her parents came home, I almost told them. Instead, I convinced myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe the latch was old. Maybe it wasn't closing completely. I decided to pay closer attention the next time. Another 2 weeks passed. As I was putting Emily to bed, an idea came to me. One of her stuffed animals, a small fox, was sitting on the windowsill. I moved it carefully so it rested directly against the inside edge of the closed window. If the window opened from inside, even slightly, the fox would fall immediately. It was a simple test. I locked the window, pulled gently against it. Perfect. About an hour later, I returned upstairs. The moment I stepped into the room, my stomach dropped. The curtains were moving again. The window was open 3 inches, but the stuffed fox was still standing exactly where I'd left it. I walked closer, trying to understand what I was seeing. The fox hadn't fallen. It hadn't even shifted. Then it hit me. If someone inside the room had opened the window, the fox would have tipped over. There was only one way it could still be standing. Someone had opened the window from outside. I slowly looked through the gap into the backyard. Nothing, only darkness. I quietly shut the window and locked it again. For the rest of the night, every little noise made me jump. The furnace, the refrigerator, tree branches brushing the roof. When Mark and Karen came home, I kept everything to myself. I needed proof before I accused someone of standing outside a child's bedroom. 2 weeks later, I arrived just before sunset. As I walked around the back of the house to throw away a drink cup before going inside, I noticed something strange. The grass, one narrow strip running from the back fence to directly beneath Emily's bedroom window, had been flattened. Not dead, not mowed, pressed down, like someone had walked the exact same path over and over and over again. The rest of the yard looked untouched. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That night, after Emily fell asleep, I didn't leave her room. I pulled a chair beside the bedroom door and sat in the darkness, with only the fox-shaped nightlight glowing across the room. Nothing happened for nearly 2 hours. By midnight, I started feeling ridiculous. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe there really was another explanation. Then, click, a tiny metallic sound. I looked toward the window. The handle moved, not fast, not violently, slowly, carefully. Someone outside was turning it, testing whether the lock had been left open. I couldn't breathe. The handle stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then it gently returned to its original position. A moment later, I heard slow footsteps crossing the backyard. Not running, not panicking, just calmly walking away. I stayed frozen until every sound disappeared. When I finally pulled back one corner of the curtain, the yard was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. 20 minutes later, Mark and Karen came home. The second they walked through the front door, I told them everything. The open windows, the stuffed fox, the flattened path, the handle moving, the footsteps. Neither of them interrupted me. Neither looked surprised. Mark quietly walked upstairs. I followed him into Emily's room. He walked straight to the window, checked the lock, pulled gently against the frame, then looked at me. He asked only one question. Did they get it open? I stared at him. No. He nodded once. Good. That was it. Not who was outside. Not are you sure. Just good. Karen quietly closed the curtains. Neither of them called the police. Neither offered an explanation. It felt like they'd been expecting this conversation for a long time. I never babysat for them again. Karen texted me the following week asking if I was available Friday. I politely declined. She never asked why. About 4 months later, I happened to drive through their neighborhood after visiting a friend nearby. As I passed their house, I glanced toward the backyard. Someone was standing beside the fence, completely still, looking up at Emily's bedroom window. They weren't trying to climb over. They weren't hiding. They were simply watching, waiting. As I drove away, I finally understood why Mark had repeated the same instruction every single Friday. He wasn't worried that Emily would open the window. He was worried that one night, someone else would. I was 19 when I started babysitting for the Reynolds family. They lived in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every lawn was perfectly trimmed and every porch light came on at exactly the same time every evening. Nothing about their house stood out from the others. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad had ever happened. Their daughter Lily had just turned 6. She was polite, loved coloring books, and carried the same stuffed bear everywhere she went. From the first night I met her, she was one of the easiest kids I'd ever babysat. Before leaving, her parents gave me the usual instructions. Pizza was in the freezer. Lily went to bed at 9. They'd be home around midnight. Then, just as they were walking out the front door, Lily's mother turned back. One more thing. She pointed toward an old beige telephone mounted on the hallway wall upstairs. If that phone rings after 11, don't answer it. I laughed, thinking she was joking. What if it's an emergency? It won't be. Her husband nodded. Just ignore it. I figured maybe they were avoiding telemarketers or prank calls. People had strange habits. After they left, Lily and I spent the evening making cookies, watching cartoons, and building a blanket fort in the living room. Around 9, I tucked her into bed. She hugged her stuffed bear and smiled. Good night. The house became completely quiet. I watched television downstairs while scrolling through my phone. At exactly 11:07, the hallway phone rang. The sound echoed through the upstairs hallway. I remembered what Lily's parents had said. Don't answer it. It rang 5 times, then stopped. I shrugged and went back to watching television. About 20 minutes later, I went upstairs to make sure Lily was asleep. She opened her eyes as I stepped into the room. I heard the phone. So did I. You didn't answer it, right? No. She smiled. Good. I laughed. Why? She looked toward the hallway. The man only calls when Mom and Dad leave. I smiled awkwardly. What man? She shrugged. I don't know. Have you ever talked to him? No. What does he say? He asks where everyone is. Children imagine strange things. I assumed she'd overheard her parents talking about unwanted phone calls and created her own explanation. I kissed her forehead. Go back to sleep. She closed her eyes almost immediately. When her parents returned, I mentioned the conversation. Karen's smile disappeared for just a second. Then she forced another one. Kids have active imaginations. Mark simply unplugged the hallway phone from the wall before going upstairs. I thought that was odd, but I didn't question it. 2 weeks later, I babysat again. Everything went exactly the same. Dinner, games, bedtime. At 11:11, the hallway phone rang. I ignored it. 5 rings. Silence. When I checked on Lily, she was already awake. It called again. Yeah, she looked at me seriously. It doesn't like new babysitters. I laughed. What do you mean? It always asks where you are. A chill ran through me. How do you know that? Because it asked the last girl. I frowned. What last girl? The babysitter before you. I had never heard them mention another babysitter. Before I could ask another question, Lily rolled over. I'm sleepy. That was the end of the conversation. When her parents came home, I asked Karen if they'd had another babysitter before me. She hesitated. For a little while. What happened? It just didn't work out. That answer felt rehearsed. The next Friday I agreed to babysit again, mostly because I wanted to know why everyone acted so strangely about a telephone. The evening passed normally. At 10:50, I found myself staring at the hallway phone. Nothing. 11 came. Still nothing. I actually started feeling relieved. Maybe whatever weird coincidence I'd built up in my head was finally over. Then, 11:18. Ring. Ring. The sound echoed through the empty hallway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, just listening. It kept ringing, one ring after another. Longer than before. Finally, against my better judgment, I walked upstairs. The receiver hung on the wall exactly where it always had. It rang again. I reached out, picked it up. Hello? Silence. Then a man spoke. His voice was calm, quiet, almost conversational. You aren't in the living room anymore. Every hair on my arm stood up. I hadn't told him where I was. No one had. He continued. You're upstairs now. I couldn't speak. The hallway suddenly felt much darker. The man chuckled softly. That's better. The line went dead. I stood frozen. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else. Then Lily's bedroom door slowly opened. She looked at me. You answered it. I couldn't even deny it. She sighed. He knows where you are now. She quietly closed the door again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept every light in the house turned on until her parents came home. The moment they walked inside, I told them everything. Neither of them looked surprised. Mark walked upstairs without saying a word. He unplugged the hallway phone, wrapped the cord around it, then carried it into the basement. I followed him. What is going on? He stopped halfway down the stairs. Finally, he answered. Nobody's called that number in years. I stared at him. What? We disconnected the line after the previous babysitter quit. He looked exhausted. It isn't connected to anything. I laughed nervously. That's impossible. I know. He set the phone on a basement shelf. We've replaced it 3 times. My stomach dropped. Why didn't you tell me? Because if people know. He stopped himself. They don't come back. I never babysat there again. A week later, Karen texted asking if I was available. I ignored the message. A month passed. Then another. Eventually, the whole experience started feeling like a nightmare I'd imagined. One evening, I drove past their neighborhood on my way home from work. Without thinking, I slowed as I passed their house. Everything looked normal. The porch light was on. The living room television glowed through the front window. Then I looked upstairs. Mounted on the hallway wall, I could clearly see the beige telephone. I frowned. Mark had carried it into the basement. I watched the upstairs window as my car rolled slowly past. The phone rang. No one was anywhere near it. The receiver never moved, but I could hear it, clear enough through my open car window. Ring. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. One last time. The hallway light turned on. The phone stopped ringing, and for just a second, someone standing beside it appeared to be watching me leave. I was 21 when I started babysitting for a family that lived about 30 minutes outside town. The house sat at the end of a quiet road surrounded by tall oak trees. It wasn't old enough to feel creepy, but it wasn't new either. It had that lived-in feeling every family home eventually develops. The couple, David and Melissa, had a 5-year-old son named Noah. He was quiet, polite, and spent most of his time drawing dinosaurs. The job seemed simple. Feed Noah dinner, read him a bedtime story, be home until midnight. As Melissa gave me a quick tour of the house, she stopped outside the upstairs bathroom. "There is one thing we need you to remember." She opened the medicine cabinet above the sink. Inside were neatly arranged bottles of pain relievers, allergy medicine, vitamins, and first aid supplies. "If you need anything, use the cabinet downstairs." She closed the mirror. "Please don't open this one." I smiled. "No problem." She looked relieved. "I mean it," David added quietly. "It isn't dangerous. We'd just rather you didn't." It seemed like an odd request, but every family had strange rules. Once they left, Noah and I made grilled cheese sandwiches, watched a dinosaur movie, and played board games until bedtime. Around 9 o'clock, I tucked him into bed. Good night. By 10:30, I realized I had a headache. I remembered the upstairs bathroom, then remembered Melissa's request. Instead, I walked downstairs and found another medicine cabinet exactly where she'd said it would be. I took 2 ibuprofen and forgot all about it. 2 weeks later, I babysat again. Everything happened exactly the same way. As Noah brushed his teeth, he looked toward the upstairs bathroom. "My mum doesn't like that cabinet." I laughed. "I know. She says it changes." "What changes?" "The stuff inside. Kids imagine strange things. I wouldn't worry about it." He shrugged. "I don't." That was the end of the conversation. The following Friday, I arrived a little earlier than usual. Melissa thanked me again for never using the upstairs cabinet. Something about the way she emphasized it made my curiosity impossible to ignore. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, I stood outside the bathroom. I stared at the closed mirror for almost a full minute. Finally, I opened it. Everything looked completely normal. Medicine bottles stood in perfect rows. Bandages, thermometer, cough syrup, nothing unusual. I almost laughed at myself. Before closing it, I noticed a large bottle of aspirin sitting on the top shelf. Without thinking, I memorized where it was. Top shelf, left side, facing forward. Then I shut the cabinet. The next Friday I babysat again. The moment Noah was asleep, I walked upstairs. I opened the cabinet. The aspirin bottle was no longer on the left. Now it sat on the right side beside a bottle of vitamins. Every other bottle looked slightly different too. Not messy, not knocked over, just rearranged. I frowned. Maybe Melissa had organized it differently during the week. It wasn't exactly proof of anything. Still, something bothered me. I pulled out my phone, took one picture, then carefully closed the mirror. The next Friday, I compared the photo before opening it. When I finally did, my stomach tightened. Almost every bottle had moved. The thermometer had switched shelves. The vitamins were now in the back. The aspirin had returned to the left. Nothing looked dramatically different, but nothing matched my photograph either. I checked the date on my phone. It was definitely the same cabinet. Someone had rearranged everything. I took another picture. That night I asked Melissa as they returned home, "Did you reorganize the medicine cabinet this week?" She stopped smiling. "What?" The bottles moved. She slowly looked toward David. He answered, "No." Neither of them said another word. The following Friday, I decided to find out for myself. After putting Noah to bed, I opened the cabinet again. I took another picture. Then I placed a small roll of bandages sideways across the front edge of the middle shelf. If someone opened the cabinet later, the bandages would have to move. I closed the mirror. Then I stayed downstairs all evening. No one else entered the second floor. Just before midnight, I walked upstairs. The bathroom door was exactly where I'd left it. I opened the cabinet. The bandages were standing upright again, exactly where they'd originally been. Every bottle had changed places. I felt my heartbeat speeding up. There was no way anyone had enough time to perfectly rearrange everything without me hearing them. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The inside of the mirrored door was covered with fresh fingerprints. Not one or two, dozens, long streaks across the glass, as though someone had been gripping the inside of the mirror. I was certain they hadn't been there earlier. My own fingerprints were only on the outside edge where I'd opened it. These were different. They were inside. I quickly took another photograph before closing the cabinet. When David and Melissa returned home, I showed them every picture. Neither of them looked surprised. Melissa quietly sat down. David stared at the photos for several seconds. Finally, he sighed. It moved again. I looked back and forth between them. What is happening? Melissa spoke first. We've been finding things moved for almost a year. We thought one of us was forgetting. Then we started taking pictures. She opened her phone. There were dozens of photographs. Every single one showed the bottles arranged differently. I even bought a new cabinet, she said. It didn't matter. David quietly added, we stopped opening it unless we absolutely have to. I couldn't think of anything to say. Nothing about the situation made sense. I never babysat for them again. Months later, I was deleting old pictures from my phone when I found the photographs of the medicine cabinet. Curious, I zoomed in on the last image. At first I focused on the bottles. Then I noticed the mirror. Behind me, reflected in the hallway, a hand rested against the wall just outside the bathroom door. Pale fingers, perfectly still. I remembered exactly how silent the house had been. I remembered believing I was completely alone upstairs. I wasn't looking at my own hand. Both of mine had been holding my phone. The police never found anyone. David later told me they renovated the bathroom and removed the cabinet entirely. It didn't matter. The bottles stopped moving. But every family photograph taken in that upstairs hallway after the renovation showed the same thing. A pale hand, resting against the corner of the wall, just outside the bathroom, waiting for someone to open the cabinet again.